Okay. Hello, everybody. Can you guys all hear us okay? Just someone fire away a message in the chat. Make sure you can hear us okay. Okay. Raphael can hear us. All right. So really pleased to have Dave Freel and Siamac Rezaiezadeh here for our webinar. Before we jump into things, just kind of want to give you guys a preview of what we'll be doing. The goal is to have a 30-minute webinar, nice lively discussion with our two panelists here. Feel free to drop questions, comments. We will take 10 minutes at the end to review all the questions then. So thanks very much for joining us. Let's hop into it. I'd like to introduce my two guests here. Again, very nice to have Dave and Siamac here. Two people who, Dave is an expert, CFO at CloudCommerceGroup. CloudCommerce has done some really good things in advancing their payment and billing. They've been able to employ some technology to simplify transactions with their customers. So I think it'll be a really good use case for you guys in attendance. Siamac, he is the director of product marketing at GoCardless. They're really forging the way in direct debit and recurring payments. So welcome, guys. Would you guys like to add anything?
Nice to be here. Looking forward to talking about it. I don't know if it's just a little bit of a nerd in me, but I absolutely love this stuff. So yeah, excited.
Yeah, super excited to be here. Really interested in the conversation, and I think you nailed the introduction, Charlie. Well done.
Thank you very much. Hey, Dave, you're definitely not alone. I'm sure there's lots of payment nerds here, right?
That's what
we do these things for. So I just want to preface by saying that I think that I think a lot of people here would agree that we're on like the precipice of a B2B revolution, B2B payment revolution, right? The dawn of one. You know, we look at the B2C world, and it's very easy to pay your friends via your phone when you're out to dinner, and businesses don't have that same luxury with their customers. But I think there will. That's changing quickly, and there will be winners and losers. And you kind of need to hop on the boat or else you'll miss it if you're going to accelerate your business in these times, right? So we always talk about the order to cash cycle. There's a conventional one, and it's quite dated, right? You send your invoice, you track it, you have to follow up, you have to manually reconcile the payment. It kind of looks like this. This is a bit of a dated cycle. There's definitely a new one in place, and their companies are transitioning from one to the other. So I want to start with you, Siamac. Where do you think the future of this order to cycle is going, and kind of what does the future of B2B payments look like from your eyes?
Yeah, it's a good question, and something that we kind of think about quite a lot over here at GoCardless. I think for me, and talking when I talk to customers, right, or potential customers, talk to the market about their B2B payments, I think the thing that kind of comes across is an extraordinary amount of B2B payments are still effectively offline, right? So they're still effectively a send out an invoice and then say, hey, customer, could you please, when you feel like it, send me the money that you owe me and do that via a bank transfer and put it into my bank account, or potentially even send me a check, right? I think something like 50% of all B2B invoices in the US are still kind of check payments, right? So you've got this huge number of effectively offline transactions where you've got kind of zero visibility on the payment, you've got no control on the payment, you've got minimal integration that then causes a whole heap of problems. And so I think that the thing that's going to happen from a future perspective is really how do we move those off-platform and offline payments online, right? So that there's total visibility over what's happening and when. Everyone's in control. There can be, there's minimal kind of reconciliation required. You don't need to throw bodies at the problem to figure out kind of what's happening. I think that is probably the steps that it's happening next. Obviously, lots of talk about kind of new types of technology, but I honestly think it's about getting the basics right. And I think that's the kind of the revolution and the change that's coming in this order to cash cycle in the next few years. And interestingly, there's a lot of studies and a lot of kind of research has got into the effects of kind of what's happened in the last kind of 9 months with COVID-19. And I think that one of the interesting things that happens is we've probably accelerated that revolution. We've probably seen about 5 years of change in about 9 months or 12 months or so to kind of accelerate that.
I totally agree. And like you said, there's still so much that's done offline. But like kind of by default, customers have had to become more comfortable with online payments, which might not be a good thing from their eyes right now, but like ultimately, like it's something that's going to really help them down the line. Dave, for you, I'm curious to see what cloud commerce is, or hear what your order to cash cycle looks like. At the moment, does it look like a bit like this outdated version or this older model? Do you have elements of the new? And what would your ideal order to cash cycle look like at a high level? We'll dig into the details down the line, but what does at a high level your cycle look like at the moment at Cloud Commerce?
Yeah, sure. It's a little bit of a hybrid at the moment. So CloudCommerceGroup, like a lot of companies, has gone through quite a transformational change. Ours was actually in process before COVID, because we'd actually just merged two companies together, and we went from having two distinct companies with different products to having one larger company with a portfolio of products. So there was a lot of consolidation there and different cash cycles. So we're still very much in the process of trying to find our legs in that regards, and that's actually how we ended up stumbling across Upflow. We've got elements of, we'll send an invoice, we'll expect a bank transfer payment, and we'll politely go cap in hand every few days or few weeks to remind people that they owe us money, coupled with direct debits, where we raise the invoice and take the payment simultaneously, and we don't need to do anything, and that's our ideal. We want to reduce the amount of manual work required throughout the business so that we can scale, and that's what it boils down to for us. Can we acquire more and more customers without needing to proportionally acquire more and more staff? And that's ultimately the game we're playing.
Right. And it sounds like you're in a bit of transition, but is it fair to say that you're employing the right tools to help you along in that transition, right? Like ideally it'd just be direct debit, like frictionless payments, but it's not the case. So like you've implemented some processes to kind of help you along in the midst of this hybrid model you speak of.
Absolutely. So I've always been a long believer in using technology to solve problems and to scale problems. Rather, if you hit the capacity of your team, you've got two avenues. Do you throw extra staff at it, throw extra heads at it, or do you find ways to make it more efficient with the heads that you have got? Sometimes you've got to hire more anyway. That's just the nature of the game. But you can look to find a tool that can solve that problem for you. It works a lot better overall. To pick an example, we used to use literally just Google Sheets to manage our credit control process. So we would just put a little note on there to say someone's not paid their invoice and keep a track of whether they're paid or not. After we've merged the two companies together, we found that was just unworkable. As soon as you needed a scalable process, well, looking at a spreadsheet and trying to work out who needs a call today is not the way to do it.
Yeah.
And that's what made me start looking for a software solution, because people is great, but there's only so many people you can throw at a problem, when actually you just need something that says this person needs a call today, this person needs a call tomorrow.
Yeah. You've gotten ahead of yourself, Dave. I was going to ask you about those Google Sheets down the line, but it's funny you mentioned like the manual processes and the cost of recovery, and I think Siamac's going to share some interesting statistics with us about that. Overdue payments is one thing, but actually the effort that you have to do to collect those creates whole new problems for your businesses. So when we talk about the problems overdue payments, why they're such a big problem, obviously, it really affects your ability to grow your business. And when you get overdue payments consistently and they add up, that's when it really starts to be a problem. So when we look at the different types of costs, the one thing we talk about is obviously, working capital, right? You need a healthy cash flow and you need to be able to invest in your future. Siamac, you're an entrepreneur, I believe, a past entrepreneur. You've worked with enterprise-sized businesses at GoCardless. Do you think that business leaders are focused on the right financing and accounting metrics when they think about their business performance and the health of their business?
Yeah, it's super interesting actually, because it kind of depends who you're talking to and what it is that they're looking at. I think one of the things that I've noticed that has been evident both in my own experience and talking to business leaders in many different types of industries has been in many ways a kind of a disconnect between like a key metric involving collecting payments, and then the knock-on effects of doing that well or doing that poorly, right? So I don't think those are necessarily well understood, or at least well looked at and well known across kind of different kind of leaders. So, for example, in what ways does having a payment that isn't collected on time, how does that affect your customer experience? What are the costs across your contact center in terms of a support staff perspective? How does that add kind of cost into your kind of admin and recovery things? What are the impacts on things like customer churn, right? Like, what's the customer experience? So all these metrics that kind of feed off just this one central piece, which is, am I collecting payments on time or not?
Right.
And so I think what's really interesting, and I think what I've seen some of the really good people do in this space is yes, be focused on like a core metric, a North Star of what percentage of my payments are collected on time. But then a really clear idea of how a nudge in 1% in either direction there actually manifests itself elsewhere in the business, right? So support or customer success or elsewhere as well.
Yeah, no, it is a very complex issue, and it has your payment timelines have huge implications for the health of your business elsewhere, customer success. Our happy customers pay on time, right? Do you think that there's like one core metric we always talk about is like DSO? Do you think that businesses focus on that as much as maybe other key metrics?
I think if you were to ask kind of finance leaders, I think by and large, yes. Although
we have one with us here today, so we're going to ask him in a second.
I'm sure Dave can verify that. I think what's really interesting though is what does good look like, right? Like what is an acceptably high DSO versus and what can you do? What can you do to kind of take steps in the right direction? Certainly one of the things that we've done in the last kind of few months is we've done a bunch of research with Forrester, and one of the things that we kind of identified across, it was mostly we're looking at IT companies, but across lots of different countries. So we looked at kind of France, Germany, Australia, the US, and the UK, I think. I think we saw something like 4 out of 5 businesses have a DSO higher than 20 days, right? So big numbers on all sides. And if you then dig into kind of why that's happening, there's real underlying reasons due to their kind of operational process around collecting payments that kind of contribute to that number. And I think in many ways people just see that as being like just the way that it is. And there's not a lot you can do to kind of really change that. When there are actually, if you see that and then you look at kind of what good looks like in some really world-beating companies who kind of got this process nailed down, you can actually see the significant impact you can have on.
Yeah, I know. I talk to so many companies. I'm like, are you measuring your DSO? And they're like, yes, it is X. And I'm like, okay, are you happy with that? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, well, it can always be better. You know what I mean? Dave, to you, what are some key metrics that you guys measure at CloudCommerce on cash collection? Have you always measured them?
Yeah, sure. I think the main metric I used to use was quite a simple one, which was simply what is the total value of the outstanding invoices right now. It's a really good baseline. And if you know what that figure is month on month, you know whether you're doing better or worse than the previous month. But it's a relative figure. It doesn't act, as Siamac was saying there, it doesn't actually tell you if that's a good figure or not. It's just a good baseline for your business. But without any further context of whether that's appropriate for the industry or whether this is high or actually we're doing really well, it's hard to say. With using Upflow, which we did start doing several months ago, it presented that DSO figure to us, and actually it was even easier to keep track of it then. I think we had a figure about 14 days when we first started using Upflow. The figure for November was 5. So you can see that pattern in real time, and we could actually see what was actually impacting that on a much more granular scale, and understand what was happening in our process and what was working well and what wasn't.
Wow, that's incredible. 14 to 5.
Came on, yeah.
No, yeah, we're certainly not going to take credit. There's lots of good things that you're doing, Dave. In terms of cost recovery, and we've touched on it a bit. You touched on it with your Google Sheet, Dave. We'll get into that in more detail. The kind of the problems that you guys were, or the challenges that you guys had. Siamac, how much time do you see, like you talk to a lot of companies around the globe, how much time do you see companies wasting on actually recovering payments?
Yeah, I mean, it's huge, right? So, you know, I kind of think about this problem in two kind of separate ways. I think number one is and I think this is particularly the case for kind of growing or smaller businesses. It's how much time are you spending, you know, chasing, recovering on the phone, trying to say, hey, you know, we provided the service. Can you please pay us? Or trying to get people on the phone. And I think in those types of scenarios, it's like, what's the opportunity cost there, right? Like, Dave, what are you not doing that you could be doing that's strategically important for the business if you were not spending 20 hours of your month kind of trying to chase payments? And that's increasingly important incredibly important for growing businesses. And the other side of it is like, how, you know, can you conceptualize that in terms of an actual cost? You know, how much are you spending trying to recover payment? And certainly one of the things that we see, we've kind of done some research in this area as well. And you know, for B2C type companies, typically people spend about 10 to 15% of the value of an invoice trying to recover that invoice if they're unable to, basically, or if they've had any.
Wow.
And in the B2B space, it's even bigger. It's something, I think the average is something like 16 to 20%, right? So, and you can kind of see like there tend to be higher value invoices. They tend to have, I guess, poorer automated processes, and they tend to be more kind of manual and human based, which kind of explains the higher kind of average cost. And so if you think about that as being like a benchmark of what people are spending on recovery, you can all of a sudden see if, you know, if you've got 100 invoices outstanding in a month, or if you've got 1,000 invoices that are unpaid, or 10,000, you can start to see these costs really stack up and become a very real problem that, you know, it's just money that's not, you know, being deployed elsewhere. So whether it's time or actual cold hard cash, I think it's a super relevant area that people don't tend to think about.
Totally. It's cold hard cash, and it's the opportunity cost, like you said.
Yeah.
Now, I don't want to, we've been talking lots about like the problem. I do want to get to the solution and things that that companies can do to eliminate this issue or reduce this issue. But Dave, what are some things, you mentioned that you guys previously were using a Google Sheet when Channel Grabber and CloudCommerceGroup merged. What are like just a few things that you would run into, or like annoying things that would happen that would be like huge time wasters?
So because I came from the smaller of the two companies that was merged, that process was fine, because there'd be an average of maybe 20 customers on there, and a team of 2 of us would effectively be working on it, and each day it would just be one person would call each of those customers and try and progress each case. When we merged companies, we tried to apply the same methodology, which went from a list of 20 to a list of 60 to 80, depending on the given day you were looking. And suddenly it was quite clear this is more work than one person can do in a single day if the goal is to call everyone every day as we used to. Trying to manage that with multiple people, well, who's working on which line, who was the last person to call? Well, I spoke to them last, and do I need to pass that note along to someone before they call them, or do I just call them now? It was just a logistics question, and as you try and scale it up from 1 to 4 people as we have now in the team, those things that you wouldn't have even thought were problems suddenly became pain points.
Right. Yeah. And some people are very happy to use Google Sheets, but you really have to take that long-term view. And if you are ambitious and you want to scale your business, you're going to know that you will run into issues when you add 2, 3, 4, 5, 20 people to your department. Now, Dave, we talk about like bad debt or like percent write-off. There are like, if you don't recover payments after a certain time, like it might be lost. Do you notice like if you give a customer a bit of leeway, like if you give them an inch, they'll take a mile? Like, do you have any insight on that?
Absolutely. So this is one of the key things that we've always said as a team is, you know, that the longer someone has to pay this, the less likely we are to recover it or to recover the full balance. And I think that's absolutely true. For some reason, we do observe this pattern where, because someone's been able to almost avoid the debt, it's not always malicious either. Sometimes it's just genuine reasons. But the fact that there may now be, let's say, 4, 5, 6 months or whatever long it may be outstanding, it almost can be used as a bit of a leverage. Like, well, because now it's not just the £100 a month that I owe, it's the £600, or it's not just the £500 per month, it's the £3,000. Well, I'll tell you what, if you write off half of it, I'll give you it in cash today. That sounds tempting, and it's quite appealing to take that. when the case has been going on for 6 months. So there's lots of reasons why you can end up in that position, but certainly the longer a debt is outstanding, the less you are able to recover overall, and that does hurt you cash-wise and profit-wise.
Yeah, no, of course. It's really important to nip it in the bud, and it's good to have good internal controls to make sure that you don't forget about these things until they reach that danger zone that you're talking about. All right, I do want to move on to like the solution. We've been very negative, I feel like. I just wanted to leave this quote here. I stumbled across this last week, actually. Now, I know like Amazon is very much like a B2C company, but I think it's interesting. This is a message from Jeff Bezos all the way back in 1997. And I think what he's saying here is even then, like, they're very much focused on like the long-term strategy, maximizing, like paying really close attention to cash flow and like using that flow to like drive their growth. So like when we talk about like recovering cash, it's really important for like the short-term health of your business, but also this has huge relevance for like driving your company into the future. Obviously, we can look to the richest man in the world for some inspiration. So what can we do to like help eliminate these overdue payments? We talk about aligning with your customers, simplifying the way you transact. This is the type of the webinar. And transactions for us, I feel like it's really two things. It's obviously like the conventional idea of like a change in financial status and like the exchange of money, but it's also like exchanging information and communication between your customers. So we'll focus on three things: information, payment methods, Siamac's expertise, and communication. When we talk about exchange of information between the two parties and payments, it's not just like it's for both parties, right? So like Siamac, why is two-way visibility? You've mentioned customer experience, for example. Why is two-way visibility so important?
Yeah, I mean it's super important, right? Like, I mean, not to get too overly complicated or to overthink this in any way, right? Like, if you're a customer and you know that a payment is due or coming out of your account in the next 3 days, versus you don't have that visibility, the probability that payment will actually go through is just higher, right? Like, if I know I've got something coming up, if I know I've got to pay something, if I know how I'm supposed to pay it, and if I know what my responsibilities are, and it's easy for me to do all those to make that payment, I'm just much more likely to pay it, versus if it just comes out and I've got no idea whether it's supposed to come in or out. Especially if we're talking about businesses who have money coming in and out of their account at all through the month, rather than maybe just once a month, and it just kind of gradually deducts from their account. So I think from that perspective, for customers, it's super important to just be clear and upfront about the expectations that you're setting for them. And I think from the payee's perspective, the business who's trying to collect money, the sooner you can find out if something has gone well or if something has gone wrong, and the depth of information that you have that you have there, just means that you can react that much more quickly, right? So to give an example, if you're trying to collect payment against someone's bank account or against a credit card, let's say, and for whatever reason that fails, if you find out, the sooner you find out, the sooner you can kick off your recovery process. And to Dave's point, the sooner you try to do that, the more likely you are to be successful at that. But not only that, if you can tell the difference between this credit card payment has failed because there were insufficient funds versus this credit card failed because the account is closed or the credit card is expired, like, those are two very different problems that need to be solved in two very different ways. And so the level of visibility you have over the reasons why things have gone wrong can dramatically improve your abilities to be successful in collecting.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree. And Dave, you're employing some tactics that Siamac mentioned here. Like, how do you guys get that information of if a payment fails, or how do you ensure that customers have the right information? They know how to pay you, when to pay you. What mechanisms do you use to ensure that happens?
Mm-hmm. So it used to be very manual in terms of relying on our accounting platform to send an invoice across. And as I said, tracking it with those spreadsheets, and where necessary, poking people, resend the invoice, send another chaser email. Without it turning into too much of an advertising pitch, Upflow takes care of a lot of that communication for us now. We built a very specific workflow so that initially the customer gets the invoice when the moment it's raised. If the customer has historically chosen to pay it themselves, they actually get that 10 days before it's due. So there's an extra step in there. For most customers, though, it's due on receipt, and there's just gentle reminders. So every couple of days, if we haven't been able to take payment, you'll receive an email. And where we're using customers using GoCardless, because that is a direct debit provider that we do use, the moment the invoice is raised, we do initiate the payment at the same time. If it's successful, it closes down. They don't actually hear anything more. They just get the copy of the invoice with the polite note saying, we're going to attempt to take payment. You don't need to do anything. If that did fail, the invoice will still show as outstanding, and the workflow will trigger to send a reminder. And the first step is always something gentle, such as, hey, just to let you know, we did have some trouble with your preferred payment method. Not to worry, we'll try again, or we may need to contact you. And we'll have a look at that. We can see which invoices are outstanding and what stage of that workflow they're at. And we just expand it out further and further. And as Siamac said there, different reasons give you different causes for action. So what we actually have is prompts within our team to say, okay, we're at this stage of collection, but just have a look, see what the issue was before you call them. And then when you can call them, you can say, oh, hey, by the way, your card just expired, or, oh, by the way, the direct debit just bounced. Is it okay for us to try it again, or do you want a different payment method? And we do keep the emails quite general, but we've got that information when we do have to place a call. And what we often find is that by having a general email that just lets people know something's gone wrong, we actually find our customers being more proactive. I mentioned earlier, invoices outstanding. It's not malicious, but not, I'd probably say at least 75% of the time, it's just a genuine payment thing that they do. And the first step of that is they have to know about it. And we've automated that, which is fantastic.
Absolutely, yeah. No, I think one of the important takeaways is just taking a very customer-centric approach to this, right? Like making sure they have the information, but also knowing that you reach out to them if something is wrong in the right way, and you can only do it in the right way if you've captured all the information throughout like the life cycle of the transaction. We're time is moving along quickly here, so I want to get into payment methods here, which is really interesting because we have Siamac here. Siamac, in a dream world, I'm gonna let you run with this here. In a dream world, what would be a business's preferred payment method for their customers?
Wow, I like it. I think a couple of years ago I did a presentation which was, how would you design a perfect payment method from scratch, right? And I think ultimately where we ended up was effectively optimizing across 8 areas, or kind of what we ended up calling dimensions, that are things like maximum coverage, high levels of conversion, all that kind of thing. And so there's a very, very technical answer here, which I could spend 30 minutes talking about now if we had the time. I think ultimately though, if you were to kind of really break it down, what you really want is you want a payment method that anybody can use, right? Like there's minimal actions that they need to take in order to actually functionally use it, right? Like they don't have to sign up for accounts within accounts within accounts, or they don't have to kind of go and grab a card from a wallet that's kind of in a different room. Like it's just you can use it right now with no additional kind of sign-up processes. I think then you would want so you kind of maximizing the total number of people who can use it really easily, number one. Number two is then you'd want the performance of that payment method to be really strong, particularly in a recurring environment. You want to have really strong predictability on, is that payment going to go through first time, second time, third time, fourth time? And I think the importance there is you effectively want to be taking, you want to be collecting from as close to the source of funds as possible, right? Like, so in many cases that's directly from the bank account, right? Or just you want as few obstacles in the way,
right?
Then less can go wrong. And then I kind of as a knock-on effect to that, I think that you want the business to be in control of when and how that payment is collected, rather than relying on humans to do that job for you. Because as Dave said, it's not necessarily nothing malicious, but humans are humans, life gets in the way, and other things are more important. So I think the thing about if I was to break it down as to how would I think about like the dream payment method, it would be really high converting that anybody can use, super high performance because almost nothing can go wrong in the process, and then the business is in control of when and how that's collected.
Yeah, I really like the point on control, because like you don't want to look at this as like a power struggle, but I think that like for so long, like especially if you're dealing with offline payments and bank transfers, well, the customer is largely in control, and like ideally the person who's providing the service or good should be the person in control. So Dave, Siamac has laid out his ideal payment method. What's CloudCommerce's? Do you guys have a default payment method?
Absolutely, and Sam is going to absolutely love that it's GoCardless.
Yeah.
And I promise that's not prearranged.
No.
We've used the services for 7 years now, and we actually only this year adopted QuickBooks as our accounting platform. We specifically chose QuickBooks because of its close integration with GoCardless that allows us to have a direct connection of the mandate to the customer record in our accounting package, so that when we raise an invoice, we can literally just tick to say, take the payment by direct debit now. We save the invoice, the customer gets a copy through Upflow, and the payment is initiated through GoCardless. And that's it. We don't have to have any more involvement in that process unless something does go wrong, which we get notified about. And that is perfect. So we do offer a wide variety of payment methods. You're never going to satisfy everyone with that method. But my team would always attest to the marching orders are, whenever you speak to a customer, just politely ask them if they want to move to a direct debit. It saves us a lot of overheads. And as I say, it puts us in the driver's seat, and is probably more reliable than the other methods as well. It's got a higher success rate. We see that, and just far more efficient for us.
Yeah, no, it's interesting you say like just ask. Like I feel like if you ask someone, or if you just tell them and say this is our default payment, they won't necessarily argue, right? Now, Dave, does it depend on like the strength of your relationship with your customer, right? Like how you approach that conversation? Does the customer relationship impact the payment that they prefer, or how hard you push?
I think it can do. I think there certainly is an element of trust in there. We do encounter a lot of customers who are probably say through traditional reasons have always wanted to be in control of money leaving their bank accounts. That's kind of the thorn in the side of the direct debit model, is that some people just want to be the ones to press the button. Over time, I think you can establish trust with customers. That we are billing you correctly, we are providing a valid service. We're not just going to use this mechanism to take a load of money out of your account. We're only ever going to take what's appropriate. And the more they see that in action, you can just keep having those polite conversations every month. It's like, oh, hey, direct debit today? No, okay, I'll ask you next month. Kind of talk. Certainly helps. Absolutely.
Yeah. No, I think it's really important to have communication in place to kind of help your customers along that journey. Like kind of you have customers kind of adhering to the old order to cash cycle if they're doing offline payments or whatever, but having processes in place to kind of like escort them along to like a newer, faster, more frictionless model. Siamac, do you think is it important to offer customers flexibility? And maybe can you share, like you've worked on a global scope, like why flexibility is sometimes necessary?
Yeah, I think if you think about flexibility across a number of angles, right? Like, so how frequency of payment is one. Maybe some people want to pay for things up front. Some people want to pay for things monthly. Some people want to pay annually. So I think that is an important area of flexibility, so that people can kind of match things to their own business process. But I think given we're on the topic of payments, I think that the important piece here is probably flexibility of how to pay, right? And so to Dave's point, absolutely, I think businesses can be more, I wouldn't say stringent, but definitely suggest like, hey, look, this is our default option, it's best for us, and here are the reasons why it's best for you. But the payer preference does vary all around the world, right? So you're always going to have some customers who want to pay by bank transfer, who want to pay by credit card, who want to pay by a digital wallet, who want to pay by direct debit. And so catering for that preference overall is super important. And you'll see that preference change country to country, right? So if you were to look at we've done some research with YouGov over the last couple of years to track payer preferences around the world, and we can see if you ask consumers, for example, or businesses in the UK, and say, okay, you're buying a service which might be an online SaaS service, How would you like to pay for that? How would you pay for that service? Given these choices, and you see a majority in the UK actually will choose direct debit as their preferred payment mechanism, and there's a lot of reasons for that, which I'm sure we could dig into. If you were to then look at that in the US, for example, you would see that the preferred payment mechanism tends to be credit cards, and that is a very distinct kind of difference, and you've got to be able to cater for those differences, because otherwise you are going to lose customers. We've certainly seen businesses who have, just by adding a payment method, like doing nothing other than adding a payment method onto their checkout screen, increase overall conversion by 10 to 15%, right? Just by adding a payment method, not doing anything else on the screen. So it's clear that if you're not offering the major payment mechanisms, you're probably losing out on some customers, particularly if it's a self-serve e-commerce led kind of acquisition process. Right. Obviously, if you've kind of got salespeople talking to your prospective customers, then it becomes a lot easier to manage.
Right.
So I think flexibility can be super important, and there definitely are regional differences. You need to be
right. Yeah, like you need to offer flexibility to have like a wide payment funnel to like get customers in, and then like once they're in, like use the tactics Dave mentioned to get them onto your most successful payment method.
Precisely. Yeah.
Right. Okay, guys, we're running a bit behind schedule, so I just want to zip through this last bit, which is all around communication, particularly after something's gone wrong. So Dave, like for overdue payments, like sometimes like it can be awkward, like telling customers to pay, like, hey, you're overdue, right? So like what kind of tactics do you guys use, or tools do you guys use to make that communication really time efficient on your end, but also like very like considerate of like your customer and their feelings, let's say?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so the first message is always to be polite. There are customers we need to get payment, but we're always on the side of the customers and understanding to any circumstances that we may not be privy to yet. COVID this year is obviously a perfect example of that. People who are no longer paying bills that used to be good payers. Is there a very valid reason for that? So let's always have a very, very gentle tone until we establish more information. And I always say to my team, there is a difference in customer when you don't really know anything until you actually connect with them in the first instance. And we start off by emailing, and the first one is just wanted to check you got the invoice. It's overdue. Wasn't sure you knew about that. Your payment method failed. Please click here to set up a direct debit, or click here to make a card payment. Very simple. If we don't hear anything for a few days, it's a phone call. And that first phone call is, hey, just want to check. Did you get the email? Did you get the invoice? Is everything okay? Is everything in order? Do you need anything from me? Very, very polite, very friendly. If you don't connect, then we just kind of carry on down that route, but gradually getting a bit firmer. And it's just a bit of, hey, it is outstanding. It's quite a lot outstanding now. We do need to get that payment. But if there's any unforeseen circumstances that we're not aware of, just please talk to us and let us know. We'll work with you, whatever it might take. Where that sort of changes is if you connect to a customer and you kind of sense maybe you're getting a bit of a runaround, and that can happen. And then probably you would start being a lot firmer, a lot quicker than if you just let it run its course. But we rely heavily on Upload to go down that gentle route first, and the deviation kind of occurs in our tone and out from our knowledge at that point, from what we actually encounter when we manage to speak to a customer directly.
Very good. Yeah. And it's nice to have like, you don't want to have to think too much about the tone, right? So it's nice to like have to understand the customers that you're dealing with, like, so you can prescribe a certain tone to make it like as time efficient as possible when you're following up.
Absolutely.
Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
Very good. Yeah. So like that's probably like very relevant in like overdue payments, offline payments, perhaps like failed payments. What about like Siamac? So like obviously direct debit, very high performing payment method, as Dave has mentioned. What happens when these do fail? Is there like a certain retry strategy that companies should employ, or like how should they approach that?
Yeah, I mean, I think and this kind of builds on I think what Dave was saying, which is just now, but also throughout our conversation, where I think your strategy needs to be as customer centric as possible, right? Like that's the kind of first of all, these are your customers, right? These are the people that you want to kind of continue having a relationship, especially in where in a recurring revenue environment where this isn't a one purchase and go sort of relationship. This is something hopefully will last for years. And so you've got to have a customer centric approach, and I think that applies to your retry strategy as much as it does to anything. So if we think about a payment failing, I think that the typical way to kind of retry that payment is probably typically companies do kind of two things. And number one is they send a bunch of comms to say, hey, your payment has failed. We're going to retry in X days, and that will support the retry strategy. And then they will retry that payment, whether it's by direct debit or credit card, or a digital wallet, let's say, and it typically would be on an arbitrary basis, right? So they'll retry that payment every 3 days, or they'll retry that payment once a week for the rest of the month, or something like that. And that gets reasonable levels of success, but it's not particularly customer centric. I think where the real customer centricity kind of comes from is what is the best possible retry strategy for that individual customer, right? And can you predict, right, Charlie's payment has failed. Based on everything that we know about Charlie, we think that actually retrying that payment, instead of on the 18th of December, we're going to try it on the 28th of December. Whereas for Dave, actually the 2nd of January feels like the most appropriate time. And if you can kind of get that right, your probability of success goes up demonstrably. And I think that is kind of like true customer centricity. It's kind of like not just tailoring your comms, but tailoring your entire retry approach to the customer.
Absolutely, yeah. Not just choosing an arbitrary date, right? Like applying some real intelligence to the process. And like you mentioned, it really boils down to like understanding your customers, how they pay, and aligning with them, which is
And to speak to that sort of a little bit more, so we sort of the process that I've described and focused on there is what we term our default workflow. Understanding your customer actually means that we do have a couple of side workflows that don't have many people on them, but actually, you know what? This customer, they don't need calls, just the email reminder. They don't want bothering on the phone. They will pay, and they will pay within 30 days, but they're a bit slow, but we know them. We're fine with that. This customer, you don't need any firmness in the tone whatsoever. It's just a repetition of your invoice is outstanding. We know them, we trust them, and you can tailor that approach. And when you do learn your customers, start off on your default. As you get to know them and become more comfortable and you understand what payment methods they're on, you can have as tailored or as a generic as approaches as appropriate for your business and the service you provide.
Thanks very much, Dave. I would absolutely love to keep talking about this. It's been really great, guys. But I did say that we would only be 30 minutes, and we've gone 43 minutes. That's a real tribute to the two panelists we have with us today. So I wanted to open it up to questions to anyone in the audience who had any questions. Take advantage of Dave and Siamac while we have them here. So yeah, if anybody has any questions, please ask them now. Don't be shy now. Don't be shy.
Well, we can assume that it's a very long question that'll take them.
Yeah, that's the thing. They're definitely all thinking really, really, really hard right now.
I have a question for you, Dave. Actually, while we're waiting, what have you done? What's gone wrong in your kind of, let's say, trying to collect an overdue payment, and kind of what were the implications of something going wrong, for example? Like how have you dealt with that?
Yeah, sure. I suppose one of the things that's a really interesting example in that is the service that we provide, or at least one of the products, has a very, very large upfront fee, and those actually started going wrong a little bit because they were falling into our normal workflow, which is kind of reserved for an ongoing relationship. It wasn't really designed for new customers who we hadn't actually done any business with yet, and it wasn't intended to chase invoices of that nature. The way we actually solved that was to say, actually as bookkeepers, it's not appropriate for us to be chasing payment for that initial sales invoice, because really the sale isn't closed at that point. And we created a custom workflow called New Sale, And we actually then invited our sales team into the Upflow environment and made them account managers. So we now have an initial step before they fall into our normal billing team, where if a new sale account in QuickBooks, i.e. a customer who hasn't actually paid us anything yet, is dealt exclusively by the account manager, which is the salesperson. That gave the real hole in that was that the salesperson didn't necessarily have visibility that the invoice that they'd sent out was unpaid because they're not in the normal bookkeeping processes. And then, interestingly, those initial payments are almost exclusively made by bank transfer. So we then would have to step in, or we choose to step in to say, great, we've got your bank transfer, thank you for that. Now we want you to fill in a direct debit mandate for your ongoing payment, which is your recurring payment method. So we actually, this was all a learning process, part of merging companies and adopting new systems. And that's what kind of emerged from that.
Got it. Yeah, makes sense. Thank you.
Awesome, Dave. Well, unfortunately, no bold attendee came up with a question. We did have a comment from Reese, who said that it was very informative, and it's thinking about changing a few things from this. So seems like you guys have given some people some actionable thoughts to work with. For everyone in attendance, thank you for coming. If you have any questions about GoCardless, about CloudCommerce, about Upflow, you know who to talk to. I want to thank our guests again for joining us. It's really been a pleasure talking to both Siamac and Dave. As you can tell, I'm sure that we can go on and on and on. It's been really, really a pleasure talking with you guys. So thanks for coming.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks.
All right, and have a great day to everyone. Happy holidays, and take care. Thanks for coming. Cheers.